So recently, I had a chance to revisit Stalker from Andrei Tarkovsky. It's one of my favorite films ever. I love the absolute shit out of that movie. But it got me thinking because a few months ago on the Criterion Reddit, I posted a thing talking about films that were very similar to Stalker, and it actually got like a couple of hundred upvotes, or like 100 or so, a little over 100 or so upvotes. And there were some people giving recommendations, and there were some people saying that there's not really another film like Stalker. I feel like I do have a few films that are similar to Stalker. I feel like they'll scratch that Stalker itch, I guess you could say. And I'm going to talk about those five films, and two of those films are actually from Alex Garland. Now, again, these are just films that sort of remind me of Stalker in a sense. Films that I would recommend if somebody came up to me and was like, hey, I really like Stalker. Do you have any films that you could maybe recommend to me? And each one of these films sort of have their own, I guess you could say, reason on why it reminds me of Stalker. And if you guys have not seen Stalker, what are you doing? Go watch it right now. So the first film that I'm going to talk about, actually the first two films that I'm going to talk about are the Alex Garland films. And the first film is Men. Now, Men has Jesse Buckley. It's directed by Alex Garland, and it's his most recent film. Well, his next film that's coming out is called Civil War. And the reason why Men reminds me of Stalker is in terms of how abstract Stalker can be and how abstract Men can be, because Stalker is a pretty straightforward narrative where you have a stalker taking these individuals into the zone, and they go through the zone to get to this certain point, and it basically grants you your dreams. Now, Men obviously doesn't center around that, but Men really does take that approach where it's very straightforward. A woman is, retreating to the countryside after something happened with her husband, and as the story goes on, it becomes more abstract. There's even a section of the film where she's traveling in the woods, and the camera's just sort of following her for almost 10 minutes, and it's very hypnotic in a way that Stalker is. So when I say that Men reminds me of Stalker, it's just because there are elements of Men that are very similar to it, and Men does take a very abstract approach without spoiling anything. At number 4, the next Alex Garland film is Annihilation. Now, Annihilation is probably the more action-packed film on this list, and I would not really say that this film is a slow burn whatsoever, although it is slower than your typical, I guess you could say, sci-fi film. There's mutated animals, a mutated bear, and a very iconic sequence. But what this film does that's similar to Stalker is it has sort of this zone area that's very similar to what Stalker has. And even, which I won't spoil anything, but even the ending of this film, it's very up to interpretation, just like Stalker is. And I guess you could say the comparisons for this film are less than, the other films on this list, but Annihilation has that very core sort of premise where a group of people are going inside this zone, and they're basically trying to find something or an explanation or whatever. I don't really want to spoil too much because Annihilation does have a very, very satisfying conclusion. Well, I wouldn't say satisfying, but I would say satisfying in terms of the approach that Annihilation takes with its narrative. But if you're looking for that Stalker itch and you're looking for a couple of characters to go into the zone like Stalker, then I would definitely recommend Annihilation. But at number 3 is a Ben Wheatley film. And if you're not familiar with who Ben Wheatley is, he did a film called Kill List, which is a solid film. I think A Field in England and Kill List are just extraordinary films. I think they're films that are going to live on for a long time. But A Field in England is extremely similar to Stalker in a sense of you're basically watching this group of people travel in this field. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but you're just basically hearing them talk, and you're sort of hearing some self-commentary on each one of them, or sort of just them talking about the situation that they're pursuing. And there's a really good scene that's not even reminiscent of Stalker. It involves a tent, and it's a very good scene. But this film is it really does fit the aesthetic of Stalker in terms of you're watching a group of characters travel across this field. They're doing a lot of talking, and I guess that's sort of a lot of what Stalker is. But that Field in England was one of the first films that came to mind when I started thinking about Stalker, and or films that were very similar to Stalker. And I had an enjoyable time with The Field in England. It's a pretty solid film. If you guys have not had a chance, to see it, definitely check it out. If you guys have not had a chance to see Kill List, definitely check out Kill List as well. Two Ben Wheatley films that are absolutely extraordinary. And at number 2 is a recent film, a film that I cannot find in theaters whatsoever. I was fortunate enough to see it at the Chicago International Film Festival. It's the new Jonathan Glazer film, and it's A Zone of Interest. Now, no pun intended, a zone, the zone, Stalker. But what The Zone of Interest does is it does what Tarkovsky does a lot in his films, is it sculpts in time. And what I mean by that is Tarkovsky really did set up his scenes. Like the blocking in Tarkovsky films is extraordinary. There were some scenes in Stalker where I looked at it and I was like, I could not imagine redoing this take over and over and over again. I just feel like it would be completely time consuming, very taxing on the cast and the crew. I mean, they shot that film 3 times, but that aside, The Zone of Interest does the thing where it sculpts in time. It has a bunch of different hidden cameras throughout the house and the camp that they're in, or the little area, the zone that they're in outside of, the Auschwitz camp. And the characters are doing their own thing, and they're sort of acting, and the cameras are capturing them from each different area. And apparently they would act 40 or so minutes at a time, an hour or so at a time, I believe, if I'm listening to the Con interviews correctly. And that is just, it screams what Stalker does, is it sculpts in time, and you're just watching these characters go about their day and their lives. And when I watched Zone of Interest, it scratched that Stalker itch. I was like, okay, well, I really want to rewatch Stalker now. And I did. But Zone of Interest is a very phenomenal film. I hope it gets a wider theatrical release because I cannot find it anywhere. That film's hard as hell to find. But it really fit that whole pacing and situation with the characters that Stalker also had. And even as you get closer to the ending where things, are up to interpretation and somewhat experimental, I was reminded a lot with what Tarkovsky did, not only in Stalker, but some of his other films like Andrei Rublev, Mir, Solaris, The Sacrifice, Nostalgia, etc. And coming in at number 1, and this is kind of no surprise because I described this director as almost a modern day Tarkovsky in himself, and that's Nuri Bilge Ceylan. I hope I'm saying that right. He's one of my favorite directors working today, and this is his film in particular, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. Now, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, it does what Stalker does, is it holds on shots for a long time. It follows characters for a long time. There's a specific sequence where an apple is falling and it ends up going into the river, and it takes its time with things, but it doesn't take its time with things to be slow. It takes its time with things because it's trying to sort of bring you into the experience. And it was one of those films, one of the few films like Stalker, that whenever I was watching it, it really did engulf me, and it took me and it brought me inside this story with these characters. And essentially all this story is about is these investigators and police officers. They're trying to basically investigate a murder victim that's buried somewhere, and it's a lot darker than Stalker, and obviously different, but it is probably the film that I would have to say, if I had one film that I would compare to Stalker almost 100%, it would be Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. Again, Stalker is a very singular experience where you're not really going to find many films that are like it, but Once Upon a Time in Anatolia really did, it fit the bill. Honestly, it fit the bill, and I cannot wait to revisit it. A lot of Nuri Bilge Ceylan films are very, slow, and even his film Distant actually, I believe, shows scenes from Stalker. So yeah, you can't really get more. If you're looking for a modern day Tarkovsky, Nuri Bilge Ceylan is definitely your guy. I'm surprised that I didn't put any Andrei Zvyagintsev films in this because, Loveless and Leviathan, and I think Banishment. Those are all really, really solid films. But this is the list that I'm going with. So if you're looking to scratch that Stalker itch, definitely check these out. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up, maybe subscribe. Let me know in the comments, or other people down in the comments, some more films that you would compare to Stalker. Also follow me on Instagram and my letterbox, and you can also check out my new teaser for Pesadilla down in the description below. But anyway, take it easy. See you guys next time.